Hello, my name is Brett Fairbairn, and this video about the co-op refinery is available for your use under a Creative Commons license that allows you to freely use it as long as you attribute it to its source, the Centre for the Study of Cooperatives at the University of Saskatchewan. One of the most amazing stories in the history of cooperatives comes from my home province of Saskatchewan, where in the midst of the Great Depression, a dozen farmers decided to create an oil refinery. I'd like to tell you a bit about how that came about. On the 29th of March in 1934, 12 farmers met in the offices of the Sherwood Rural Municipality to discuss what they were going to do about the oil industry. It was an amazing moment in the history of cooperatives when a group of farmers in the middle of the Depression decided to take on the giants of the oil trade. They weren't, though, just coming to it as 12 individuals. In fact, their efforts came on the heels of a generation of organization and experience by farmers in creating cooperatives. They built on that experience and put it to work. Beginning in the early 20th century, farmers had founded buying clubs and then local cooperatives as ways to economize on purchasing the things they needed. And originally those were things like binder twine and seed and fertilizer and feed for their animals. But as farming became mechanized in Saskatchewan in the 1920s, increasingly some of the most expensive inputs that farmers in southern Saskatchewan had to purchase were tractor fuel and oil for their machinery. And so farmers, through their consumer cooperatives, began to become familiar with how the oil business worked. In the 1930s, what they noticed through their involvement in their cooperatives was a worrisome development. In the Depression, with the economic circumstances that prevailed, the oil industry was consolidating. And where previously farmers had been able to purchase from 4 suppliers, 4 refiners in the prairie region of Canada, companies were buying each other out, they were merging, they were consolidating, and the 4 suppliers had dwindled down to 2. So what farmers were facing was the prospect that they would become dependent on a monopoly and would lose their bargaining power in the marketplace. What these 12 farmers decided to do about it was to build their own refinery and enter into the market and compete with the multinationals. They set about holding a series of meetings, 10 meetings in small towns in Saskatchewan, where they called out members of existing cooperatives, organized farmers, talked to them about the refinery, collected share contributions to start a new refinery cooperative, and gradually amassed the funding. And by the fall of 1934, they discovered that they had collected about $29,500 in share capital. So they had a modest amount of money, a large amount of money for the 1930s, but a modest amount of money for starting a refinery. They engaged an experienced executive who had run one of the refineries that had closed in Saskatchewan, a man by the name of O.B. Males. And with his expert advice, the farmers and their manager started looking around Regina, Saskatchewan, to see what materials they could find to put together a refinery. They found a boiler, an old boiler that came from a brewery. They found a 36-inch diameter metal smokestack lying in a field and turned it into the fractionating tower for the skimming plant they wanted to build. And so by cobbling together rusty old parts and using the expertise of an untrained oil man, by early 1935, they were getting this tiny skimming plant up and running. And then they encountered the next problem. It turned out they used their entire $29,000 of capital to finance the construction of this plant, and there was nothing left to purchase the first rail car load of crude oil to put through the refinery. Unbeknownst to most of the directors of the cooperative, one of the farmers who was on the board of the co-op, went down to the railway agent's office and put the deed to his own farm on the counter as security for the release of that first tank load of oil. With that, they put it through the refinery. The refinery produced the fuel that farmers needed, sold it to the farmers, and in fact made almost $30,000 in surplus, in profit, in its first year of operations in 1935. So to speak, it was about 100% return on investment in a single year. But most importantly, it created a viable refinery and it met the needs of farmers. From there was no looking back. The refinery grew, it expanded, expanded. It merged with the Farmers Cooperative Wholesale Society in 1944, creating the ancestor of today's Federated Cooperatives Limited, a multi-billion-dollar cooperative that still supplies petroleum as well as food and agricultural products and other supplies that are needed by consumer cooperatives in Western Canada. One of the interesting things about this story is why farmers had to incorporate a separate co-op to start a refinery. Why didn't their existing co-ops and their existing co-op wholesale society just build the refinery? And the answer, in a nutshell, is risk. It was far too risky a venture. The existing cooperatives in Saskatchewan wouldn't touch the idea of an oil refinery. It seemed too outlandish to think that farmers could go into business for themselves. But a group of people dedicated to that vision, raising capital and collecting expertise and resources specific to a refinery, built a specialized cooperative that proved to be a success. Once it was successful, it merged with the existing cooperatives. And that illustrates an interesting dynamic of what's frequently the case in the development of cooperatives, that specialized cooperatives for each line of business, bringing together the capital and the knowledge, the expertise, and the visionaries for that particular specialized operation, are keys to success. In this case, it was the visionaries who thought of creating an oil refinery and who put their time into it that created something that has benefited thousands, millions of people ever since.